All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Uncork Twitch channel. Coming to you live today, not from MongoDB World, which you see the room behind me here. I'm not actually in that room, but that is the room that we were in on Tuesday when we had the opportunity to get up in front of a bunch of great developers and business folks and talk about codeless architecture. But I am calling from the Uncork office headquarters in New York City. My first time in this office since before COVID. Started in this office at the company back in 2018, and it's pretty cool to be back. It doesn't feel quite the same as it used to. It's a lot quieter than it was back then, but great to see some familiar faces and all that. So I don't know what your work lives are like, hybrid, fully remote, fully in the office or not, but it's been a pretty good day today. So, as you might have seen as we were promoting this episode, and again, referencing the fact that we were just at MongoDB World, we're going to do our talk again. What we had gone up and presented to everybody at the conference. We wanted to share it for you, for anyone who may not have been at the conference. And we'll definitely get that content from MongoDB World or MongoDB in the future, and we'll probably put that up in a bunch of other ways. But in the meantime, while we wait for their wonderful video producers to get that all ready and make me look better than I probably did, let's just do it for you here live. And some of this content you've seen before in various different Twitches. Some of the demo you've seen might be familiar if you're a frequent subscriber, frequent viewer. But hopefully, the way we package it up and talk about it today is going to be something new for you and pretty exciting. So with that being said, let's jump in. All right. And go into presentation mode. Okay. So our very catchy name for this, or I thought it was a very catchy name for this presentation, was Do More with Code Less. Right. So we're going to show you how you can do more with code less. It's going to be a lot more focused on codeless necessarily than just Uncork. So something that I did in front of the audience on Tuesday was first just talk about why I was the one up there. And as I'm now joining this Twitch and doing it again, I realize I don't know that I've ever really talked to you all about why I'm up here, or why I'm doing evangelism at Uncork, and why I'm on this Twitch channel. So let me just take the opportunity to do that. And I think that the key and the reason I even do this, and even talk about myself here, is because I want folks to realize that I don't do evangelism at Uncork because I've had a career in tech evangelism. And I don't do evangelism at Uncork because I found a job post online for an evangelist at Uncork. I've spent my career in software development, facing and usually solving many of the same problems that I imagine you face and solve as a developer day in and day out. And I've done this across a number of industries, at startups, at enterprises, and around the globe, where a lot of those problems are magnified by distributed infrastructure, regional regulations, and even cultural differences. About 4 years ago, I found Uncork, right? A company that has a very deep understanding of those problems and had a radical new approach to solving it. But even then, again, I didn't start as an evangelist. I spent the first 3 years of the company hands-on with the platform, developing solutions for our clients, and even developing a team, which we've brought on many times, the UDLC team, building out that team, developing features of the platform with the platform, right? And it was through that experience that I naturally found myself evangelizing Uncork, first to other folks and getting them excited about the idea of Uncork with Uncork and all that, then evangelizing to our customers and to our partners, and ultimately now to the world and the entire Twitchverse. And the piece at the bottom, this table at the bottom here, that comes from Guy Kawasaki. And if you don't know him, he is really the godfather of the concept of tech evangelism since he was back at Apple a while ago. And this here is really my guiding principle in the role. We don't do this Twitch. I'm not doing this Twitch, at least, because I'm trying to sell you Uncork, and we're trying to sell you Uncork. My bottom line doesn't get impacted by that. I'm not a salesperson. Okay, we're doing this Twitch. We're doing this evangelism because we really believe that Uncork and more importantly, codeless architecture is going to be a part of the history of software development. So with that being said, let's dive into more of codeless architecture, which really completes that less vision that has been working its way up the technology stack. So first we had servers and serverless architecture. Now at the presentation in the room, I polled the crowd and I asked them how many folks in the crowd have some aspect of their tech stack serverless. So maybe folks can throw in the chat right now, do you have part of your tech stack serverless? So give us some response, I guess, in the chat, whatever you'd like to post to let us know that you've used serverless, right? So it started with serverless and at that lowest level. Then it came up to the database level, right? And we got schemaless databases, schemaless architecture. Now, at the conference yesterday, since on Tuesday, it was a MongoDB conference, a schemaless database. So I did not ask them who was using schemaless because my assumption was, hey, you're at MongoDB World. There's a very good chance you're using schemaless. But I'd love to hear from the crowd here. Throw in the chat if you're using schemaless as part of your tech stack. Okay. And now finally, we have for the application layer, that final key layer of your technology stack, Codeless Architecture. Okay. Now, of course, the question I'd pose to the crowd here was raise your hand if you've heard of Codeless or are using Codeless. Obviously, I would say you all have heard of Codeless. You're joining our Twitch. But if you use Codeless, throw something up in the chat and tell us you're using it. Maybe you're an Uncork employee watching, maybe you're a partner, but I guess that's the case, probably many of you are using it. So I hope when I close out this window, we look at the chat, I see a lot of thumbs up, plus ones, however you want to say it, right? So as I said, now that less vision for the technology stack is complete, right? I think it's valuable to dig into each of these a little bit further, right? And again, it started with servers and serverless, which brought flexibility and agility to organizations by abstracting away the hardware that software runs on, okay? So if we start at the beginning of this evolution, it really started with physical machines, right? Now, of course, there are still physical machines out there. That's what it's all running on, right? There are still physical machines, but we don't have to deal with the same problems that came with physical machines we had to deal with a while back, right? You don't have to buy more servers than you need or buy bigger servers than you need in preparation for traffic spikes, in preparation for future growth, right? You don't have to take those machines. You don't need to throw them into a server rack and wire them all up. All of that's gone, right? That was stuff that was fun for some folks who love to do that, but in reality, and for many of us, it wasn't so great. So then virtual machines came along, right? And they said, hey, we can solve some of these problems by allowing you to effectively run multiple servers on a single server, right? Well, that was great. That solved that buying too much problem, okay? But VMs are huge, right? They contain the operating system all the way up. So they were very difficult to deploy and they were very difficult to maintain. So containers came along and containers said, hey, we can do better at virtual machines by sharing resources because sharing is caring, right? So now we started sharing resources on the server. Our containers, our virtual machines effectively became a lot smaller and as a result became easier to deploy and easier to maintain. But there's still a lot of deployment, still a lot of maintenance, and still a lot of servers. So serverless came along, okay, which was super easy to deploy because what do? You effectively just push up some code and you're done, right? They came at a very low cost because you're really only paying for what you need and what you use, okay? And they can scale, and they scale without you really having to worry about it, right? They kind of scale themselves. So ease of deploy, low cost, better scalability. Again, that brought that flexibility and agility. Okay. And now we live in a world where you can ask a lot of technology leaders or even developers, what kind of servers are you running? What operating system are your servers running? And many of them are going to tell you they don't know, or better yet, they don't even care. It's a scary proposition at first, but it's actually a really good thing. Okay. So then it comes to databases and schemaless, where companies like MongoDB, where we were just at this week, came up with solutions that allowed organizations to maximize both their structured and, more importantly, unstructured data, which is critical in a world where more and more data is coming in from more and more sources. Okay, so if we look at the evolution to schemaless, we got a little cheeky with this first one here, filing cabinets. But in reality, the problem goes back way further than that, right? Since effectively the dawn of recorded history, we've been trying to find ways to store, categorize, and retrieve data. Okay. Then with the advent of technology, what did we do? We effectively took the filing cabinet and we put it onto a computer and we started storing things in file systems. You can think about a number of web servers, right? When they would write their log files, what did they do? They would put it in a folder for a day, inside of a folder for a month, inside of a folder for a year. And then you'd have to go write yourself some scripts, or maybe just practicing your regex skills while grepping on the command line to get at the data you wanted. It was possible, but not so great. Okay. SQL databases came out. Okay. Structured query language. Now, this was great in a world where, again, companies were able to structure their data, because usually they were building a single application that was responsible for reading and writing all of their data. So they were able to plan ahead and control the data coming in. But as I said, we now live in a world where there's a lot of data coming from a lot of sources, and that ability to predefine kind of goes away now, and it becomes a lot more complicated. So enter schemaless. Okay, now I didn't go through these benefits at MongoDB World because, again, we were at MongoDB World. Everyone there was using or extremely familiar with schemaless, so I just left it to them to know these benefits. So I'm going to just try to do them off the cuff here for the first time, right? And these do come right off of MongoDB's website. So if I do a terrible job of explaining them, or you want to learn more about how schemaless gets you the benefits, shoot on over to MongoDB's website and learn more, or just look up, document-based NoSQL schemaless databases to find more information about why this is so wonderful. Just as you can go to AWS or any other cloud provider's website to learn more about the benefits of serverless, right? And ultimately go to Uncoder's website to learn more about the benefits of Codeless. So greater flexibility, right? Because again, you have all these sources coming in. You don't know what they're going to look like. You can handle a varying amount of different data types, a varying amount of different structures for your data. So you have an extremely flexible structure. And you don't have to predefine, right? You don't have to understand every source that you're going to get up front and build the database to accommodate it. You don't need to run constant alter table statements every time you need new columns and things like that. The data will just flow in and be stored. As a result, data doesn't get truncated. Imagine you don't run that alter table statement, and then on an ingestion, you're dropping fields. Or when you have to go pull the data out, you don't update your select statements or whatever queries you're using, your read statements, and then you don't lose that data on the way out. Okay. Real-time analytics, you now have a world of data that you can mix together to create really powerful real-time analytics. And then it scales. And I'm not going to get too much into that. Admittedly, I'm not the biggest expert on MongoDB scalability, but or schemaless scalability, but those type of platforms do allow you to scale tremendously along the way. So that brings us to Codeless. Okay, the next frontier of software development, which continues the long time abstraction of code. Okay, now we could go further down into the left on this chart, down to low-level languages, assembly language, even back to punch cards if we want. But I know you all are busy today, and I don't want to take up your entire day worth of Twitch, nor do we want to leave you on a bad note thinking about the days of having to manage your memory and do garbage collection and all that, the things that you no longer have to do with higher level languages that also look a lot more like English or whatever language you speak, right? More like human language, less like code, less like technology language. So higher level languages were great. Then frameworks came along. Right. And they particularly, let's take a web framework, for example. They took away a lot of the repetitive tasks that every website's going to do. Right. So you have a website and it's probably going to authenticate a user. It's probably going to have to route requests. It's definitely going to have to route requests. And it most likely will talk to a database, whether it's a schemaless database or not. All right. So these frameworks came in and they built that capability for you. And then they just let you focus on building your specific application logic. However, lots and lots and lots of code still being written. Okay. Now you have low code and code generators. Many low code platforms generate code at the end. Okay. Low code generators or low code platforms took that a little bit further and they said, hey, for a lot of those repetitive tasks, you don't even need to have code for it. You can do that all visually. But that still left a lot of other tasks necessary to be coded. And oftentimes when you're coding inside of these low-code platforms, you're doing so in a very proprietary language, something that's only going to run within their ecosystem and forces you to learn the syntax and learn the available, constructs. Okay, so not very portable. Then no-code come in. They came in, right? And no code said, hey, don't write any code whatsoever, okay? And it was Uncork's solution to that led us to Codeless Architecture, right? Where you're going to get the benefits of no IP lock-in, composability, portability, transparency, and upgradability, all of which I will cover in more detail as we dig deeper into Codeless Architecture. So when you talk about Codeless Architecture, you can basically break it down into three key pillars. You have an IDE, a runtime, and a definition. I'm going to start with the definition because that is the most critical and probably the most exciting part about it. Okay. The Codeless definition is a declarative, JSON-based open standard that defines an application's data, business logic, and presentation. Okay. And because it's JSON-based, so we were just talking about schemaless. We just had a speaking session at MongoDB World. We've probably talked about this before on this Twitch too. You could probably guess where Uncork is currently storing those JSON documents, right? Inside of Mongo, but hey, it doesn't have to be. Okay. So as I said, it's declarative. And that's extremely important because the moment you mix your logic with your implementation, you lose those benefits of portability and upgradability from the previous slide. And you're right back in a world of legacy. I'm sure many of you, if you've been developers for a while, you've gone through some kind of legacy migration in the past. Maybe you've had to port an application from Angular 1 up to React. It's not easy and it's not very fun. Okay. Then it's open, right? I said it was open. Okay. Oh, excuse me. Let me grab a little sip of lemonade here. Nice thing about being back in the office is the fridge is stocked up for me. Okay. So it's an open standard, right? And, that's extremely important these days where you look at the rapid growth of the low code and the no code market. Okay. A market that Gartner predicts will soon produce 75% of all enterprise applications, right? Which as that grows, that market is fragmenting. Every vendor's solution is extremely unique. Now imagine trying to port an application from Salesforce to ServiceNow or from Power Apps to Airtable. It's not trivial. However, if we're using open standards, it becomes far more trivial. And the concept of openness is not new. It has been fueling technology innovation for decades. Everything from open source software like Linux to open standards like HTML, CSS, and now Codeless. All right, so we have a declarative, we have an open definition in JSON, but how do you generate that JSON, right? Well, technically speaking, since JSON is just text, a developer could open up VS Code and just start typing in some JSON. But that's not very practical, is it? I don't know. It might be because I said earlier that people used to literally punch holes in cards to program. So maybe typing JSON into an IDE isn't that crazy. But we can certainly do better, can't we? And sure enough, as you all know, Uncork has an IDE, Designer. Okay. But just as developers have preferences for code IDEs, they're going to have preferences for codeless IDEs. And because that definition is open, anyone can come in and build any IDE that they want. It can build a new IDE that might better suit their development style, might be better suited for the use cases that they'll be building with Codeless Architecture, and even have features that other IDEs don't have. Okay, so now you have an IDE that generates the definition. But as we said, again, the Codeless definition, the Codeless standard is just JSON. It's just text. So how do you run it? Well, of course, you need an interpreter. And again, of course, Uncork has a runtime engine that interprets in real time the Codeless definition, both in the browser and on the server. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, what about mobile? Okay. Uncork hasn't decided to make a mobile runtime yet, but because the Codeless definition is open, anyone can come in and anyone can build a mobile renderer, just as they can potentially build another server runtime in a language like Rust to get really, really high performance if their use cases need that. Okay, so that's a lot. And it goes beyond even just having to build new runtimes. Something we've shown on this Twitch before, which I'm going to show again in a demo in a second, is that Slack is actually already today a runtime for Codeless Architecture, and they didn't even try to be. Right? We didn't work with them for them to be a codeless runtime. They are. That's extremely powerful. Okay, so that's effectively codeless. And I get it. There's a lot of code, right? There's a lot of code in that IDE. There's a lot of code with that runtime. But it is the only code that you're ever going to need. And it is completely abstracted away from the developers who are building mission critical, enterprise grade software codelessly. Okay, so let's jump into the demo. Now, I recorded the demo for the session, and then I talked over it. So I'm going to do the same thing here, pausing throughout. It's just easier and in better interest of time. And Murphy's Law said something's going to go wrong. It's going to go wrong right now. So what this demo is effectively going to show, again, things that we've kind of shown before, but really wrapped up nicely together, is it's going to show taking a data model, an application, an object built within Salesforce, in a click of a button, migrating that into the Codeless definition, and then showing how you can run that in the browser on the server, and as I said, within Slack. So let me go full screen again here, and I'll hit play, and I'll talk over it. So first thing I'm going to do is show the wrong tab and switch over to the right tab, and here we are. So this is the data model, the object that we built within Salesforce. So you can see there's a number of different fields. They have various different data types and other business rules assigned to them, such as maximum length and things like that. Okay, so this is what we're going to migrate over into Codeless. So we're going to hop over to the Codeless migration application, and all we do is just drop in the name of the object. Okay, it was UI customer C in Salesforce. So now behind the scenes, it's effectively calling into Salesforce and it's doing that transformation. And what do you get in the end? You get a complete module inside of Uncork with all the data fields and their rules, as well as pre-built connectors. So you see those plugins. If you're familiar with developing an Uncork, that's a plugin component, and that's a visual API. So because we understand the structure, and because everything in Uncork is done through this Codeless definition, even integrations, API integrations, we can auto-generate those connectors for you. So we have all the data and we have the necessary connectors. So what else do we get out of this? We get a number of snippets. Okay, snippets being reusable, pre-configured blocks that you can build on top of. Taking a block, a pre-configured component like a text field in Uncork. Let me just switch to text field in Uncork, and then applying, the labels and the keys. And you'll see here again, max length and persistent that says it's required. Okay, so these are the rules that came over from Salesforce mapped into the Codeless definition. And one of the benefits we showed Codeless on the slide earlier was that it's transparent. So you can see right here, you can see the Codeless definition for everything, whether it's the name field or that plug create that we saw first. Okay, this is not something that you necessarily have to look at, right? No, our creators aren't often looking at the JSON, but the idea is that it's there and you can see it because it does declare and represent everything that your application needs. All right, so we gave a bunch of pre-configured components that you can then use as you continue to build other other screens or other API endpoints that leverage the Salesforce model object that we pulled over. Okay. Now I think it's worth talking for a second here about how we generated that. Okay, so this is a Postman, of course, an API testing application, and the endpoint that it's calling here is again a codelessly built endpoint, because I forgot to clarify this before I started. For everything that we're showing here, it was all done codelessly, right? The conversations with Salesforce, the transformation of the Salesforce definition into the open standard codeless definition, the way that we're going to talk to Slack coming up and how we're rendering within Slack, all of that is codeless. So in order to generate everything within inside of Uncork and within inside the codeless definition, we're effectively just using APIs. So when we do a GET request against this API that says v1 string, so it's version, which is a great thing, right? So if we build a new version of a string, you can continue to have backwards compatibility with the definition of a v1 string. So here is when I do a GET request, it's telling me, okay, well, this component within the Uncork, within the Codeless definition, has the following fields that you're able to configure. And then you see in the top here, I've filled some of those out. I've said key, label, max length, and required. So now I'm going to flip the method of the request after this. I'm going to flip it to a put, but I'm going to forget, and I'm going to maybe see it was post and then remember, no, it's put. And here we are, right? There is the Codeless definition for a string field with these settings, okay? Only the necessary properties of that declarative definition. Right. So that was that process of using APIs effectively to develop and get back the Codeless definition necessary for each and every interaction is all done through this API here. So now that we know what we've got, let's switch over and let's see it in action. So we're going to preview the module, and now you're seeing the browser runtime. Okay, of course. So we're going to fill out some of the fields that come in that we ported over from Salesforce, including here. Oh, I was a little slow on the pause there, but you saw that the options in the status dropdown were filled out. Again, that came directly during the migration into the Codeless definition. Date fields are, of course, going to be formatted as date fields, and then a section to enter more longer text. Okay. Now we have two options of how we're going to save this. We can save it to Uncork, we can save it to Salesforce. So we're going to save it to Uncork first. Okay, we'll hop over to the API to get back a submission, and there it is. That's our data. So by just entering the name of an object and hitting submit, we now are running that application, saving data directly inside of Uncork. And there's the data, there's the submission data. Okay. There's only one way that we might want to go about it. Why don't we also save it to Salesforce? So I'll click Save to Salesforce, and I'll hop over to Salesforce here and refresh. And there's the data within Salesforce. So not only were we able to save the data in Uncork with a click, we're also able to save the data inside of Salesforce with one click. Okay. Now, that was the browser runtime, but as I said, we also have a server runtime out of the box. Now, there's no way to click a button on the server, so we're going to add an initializer component here in Uncork, and we're going to have it trigger the plug create. That was that pre-built connector that we had, which says create this record inside of Salesforce. So we're just going to trigger that, and that's the whole API, right? So there it is. I'll save that, save the module, and I'll jump back over to Postman again, and I will open up to the execute module, and I'm going to pass in some data there. That's just the fields, again, that matched the fields that were in the screen that we saw a second ago. I'm going to hit send, and you're going to see it looks like it was successful. We'll hop back over to Salesforce again. We'll refresh, and there it is. There's our data once again. So by just dropping in an initializer, now that same logic can be invoked through the server. So the browser runtime and the server runtime. Now let's get into the Slack runtime. Okay. So in order to integrate with Slack, you need two modules available. Okay. One is a command module, which is not the one that landed on the moon, just a module within the Codeless definition to represent the UI that's going to be inside of Slack. So this is what we're looking at here. And each one of those input fields, the company, point of contact, everything like that, those are the snippets that you see available on the left here. So the snippets I showed you in the other screen where you saw the JSON, they're available, of course, during the building experience to construct new modules and new interfaces using the same logic and the same data with the business rules that came in from the import. And then I added in a little text up at the top and a button at the bottom to complete the picture. Okay. Then we'll jump over to the second module, and this is the interactivity module. Okay. So the interactivity module is the API module that's going to get invoked when a user clicks submit inside of Slack. Okay. And in here, once again, you can see those same snippets being used, even including that plug create. That same plug create we had on the other modules used again within this context. So to build the integration with Slack, it's really just a matter of reusing already built components with the correct rules assigned to them. Okay. So now that we have both pieces of it, we're going to hop over to Slack and we're going to invoke it from a shortcut. Now, you might remember that before you can invoke it through the / command. In this case, we're doing it with a shortcut. And here it is. This is that module from Uncork represented through the Codeless definition with Slack as its runtime. Okay, that's the beauty of Codeless right there. You can have it. You can have endless number of runtimes and renderers for it. So we're going to fill out that information. We're going to hit submit, and it's going to give us a link, and we're going to jump over, and there it is. That's our data now within Salesforce coming right out of Slack. So I hope that does a pretty good job of oh, look at that. It's suggesting I watch myself. I don't want to do that. I do not. So that was the end-to-end demo. Got a lot of oohs and ahs in the crowd. I hope I got a lot of oohs and ahs from you at home or wherever you happen to be sitting today. So let's just take it home back in the slide deck. So those are some amazing things that I think that developers are doing right now with Codeless, but the list doesn't end at what I showed. You could see a ton of examples here about what people are already doing with Codeless, everything from UX design down to infrastructure management, effectively everything that you're going to encounter during application development. Unfortunately, you weren't at the Codeless Architecture session in Mongo, so you're not going to apply. You're not going to have a chance to win some AirPods, but we are very excited to give one lucky MongoDB World attendee a pair of AirPods for signing up for our newsletter. But I will say, do go to uncork.com/creators and sign up for the newsletter there. We got a lot of great content coming at you to learn more and more about Codeless as you do more than just come into these sessions. And then, here's my contact information, a lot of which you probably already know, both our Twitter handle as well as this Twitch channel that you're on. But you probably could have guessed what my email was, so I'm not really worried about sharing this right now because I know that people on LinkedIn find it all the time, and it takes you try Nick, that doesn't work. Try nick.gamble. I mean, you can effectively, if you typed bill.gates@microsoft.com, probably will hit his spam filter, but he'll probably get it. So that's it. That's what we talked about at MongoDB World. It was a really exciting time. Thanks again to our partners over there for having us a part of it. And thank you all for tuning in today. If you did miss it, or you were just so excited about seeing it the first time this week that you had to see it again. So thank you again. I would love having you all here. I see, we've got a bunch of cool, fun emojis in it. And we'll catch you next week. We don't know what we're going to talk about yet. It's going to be a big surprise, but stay tuned on all of our channels that we just promoted to hear what next week's amazing content is going to be about. Until then, have a great weekend, everybody, and happy uncoding.